Few games carry a more fabled reputation than The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. You won't have to ask too many gamers before somebody tells you it's their favorite game and someone else tells you that it's the greatest video game ever made. My top 3 games are a touch fluid, but no matter what, Ocarina of Time is always in there somewhere. That being said, I first played this Nintendo 64 adventure as a youngster, and as we all know, nostalgia can be blinding. After many years though, I've finally replayed the game over the last couple of weeks, and I think it's still the greatest. But why? Well, to begin, we need to look at what came before. The Legend of Zelda on the NES and A Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo were irrefutable classics that expanded the boundaries of what a game could be. No offense, Zelda 2, I see you over there. Nintendo was on a hot streak with Zelda, but it also had an issue. The Nintendo 64 was capable of outputting true 3D graphics, meaning that a new entry in The Legend of Zelda couldn't possibly retain the same structure as its predecessors. Just as it did with its other marquee franchise, Super Mario, the Big N needed to figure out how to turn this top-down adventure into a 3D epic. It doesn't take long to begin seeing how they pulled it off. An immediate change present in Ocarina of Time is how it's paced. Unlike Zelda 1, which throws you into the action almost immediately, this adventure begins much more slowly. The journey starts in Kokiri Forest, which is the perfect humble beginning setting. Not only does it possess a certain coziness in its visual design and accompanying music, but mechanically speaking, it's safe. Other than this large, perpetually rolling boulder, there's no way to get hurt in Kokiri Forest, which frees up the player to get used to controlling Link in a 3D space. Beyond that, you get the chance to chat with some NPCs and begin to feel a connection with this grand new world you're in. Controlling Link certainly takes a little practice, but once you get a feel for it, you'll be running around like it's nobody's business. Now look, there's no question that the general controls of Ocarina can feel antiquated when compared to the modern standard, but what's important to establish here is just how much they've been able to withstand the sands of time. If you jump into most games from this era, you're gonna have some problems. The fact of the matter is that developers just hadn't really figured out this whole 3D thing yet, making plenty of Ocarina's contemporaries borderline unplayable. Thankfully, Nintendo made some really smart choices with how it constructed Link's latest outing to make it much more future-proof. For example, Link jumps automatically if you run him off a ledge, freeing up what would be the jump button for another input. You can map up to 3 of your items to the directional buttons for quick selection. Most importantly, though, is Z-targeting. Ocarina introduced plenty of revolutionary features, but perhaps none of them are as vital as its targeting system. Now, this game certainly isn't the first one to implement some kind of targeting solution for a 3D space, but it did it better than anyone else, and that's what ultimately matters. Nintendo EAD knew that attempting to fight enemies was going to feel entirely different from doing so in a top-down perspective, so they implemented the Z-targeting system. The press of a button locks the camera onto the enemy of your choosing, enabling Link to circle strafe around the foe while always facing them. Not having to approximate where an enemy is in relation to Link means that the player can focus on slaying them with this fancy little sword. If you've appreciated the targeting system in a game that came after this one, there's a good chance it was heavily influenced by Ocarina of Time. Smooth control doesn't really mean anything without a compelling world in which to execute it though, but don't worry, Ocarina has you covered. It's difficult to articulate in words just how incredible this land is. Again, your adventure begins humbly in the cozy confines of Kokiri, but after the introductory hours, it's off to Hyrule Field in all its 3D glory. It's almost impossible to describe the feeling of first emerging out here when I was a kid. The possibilities are endless. We got some trees over here. Oh, look, there's a fence. We got this thing. Of course, by modern standards, Hyrule Field is dwarfed by almost any open world game, and yet it somehow still manages to feel humongous. This taps into one of the intangible, magical qualities of Ocarina of Time, and I think it's largely attributable to the game's structure. Similarly to its predecessors, Ocarina features the large overworld of Hyrule that contains a smattering of dungeons scattered throughout, but now there's so much more connective tissue that holds everything together. Let's circle back to Zelda 1. In this game, finding a dungeon was as simple as stumbling onto the right screen and then in you go. Of course, some of them took bombing the right rock or burning the right bush, but for the most part, you just walked into a nondescript building in the middle of the woods. Let's compare that to Ocarina of Time, using the game's second dungeon, Dodongo's Cavern, as an example. Before you can even reach the dungeon, you're introduced to Kakariko Village. From there, you have to travel up the path towards Death Mountain, where you find Goron City, home to a completely different race of creatures. These guys send you on another quest in a deep forest, which eventually enables Link to clear the path to Dodongo's cavern. All of this adventuring takes place before you even start the dungeon. Now, some may not be inclined to indulge in some of these more menial missions, but I'd argue it's key to Ocarina's gameplay loop. More than any other preceding Zelda game, Ocarina of Time presents varied, dynamic pacing that keeps the player engaged. I don't know about you, but after spending 90 minutes working through a perilous, confounding dungeon, I'm not ready for another one yet. I want to talk to some NPCs, or find another secret in Hyrule Field, or just walk around Kakariko Village until I stumble onto something cool. Ocarina of Time allows you to do this, presenting a massive amount of optional content that further grounds you in the world, and makes the journey easier for you. Collectibles, power-ups, hidden fairy fountains, they're all here in droves. Somehow, despite the grandeur of modern games, Ocarina of Time still feels massive, and I think I know why. It retains an incredibly unique structure that we rarely see in a video game. Open worlds are all the rage these days, and while they tend to be big, they do something that's always bothered me. They give you too much, too quickly. While some games are inclined to hold some areas back, all too many give you access to the entire world from the word go. Now, that may sound nice, and some people probably prefer that, but how many times have you been undertaking a story mission in an open world game only to find that you already explored where it takes place 10 hours ago? It's not a huge deal, but I love it when games slowly unfold, slowly reveal all the secrets and surprises it hides. Ocarina of Time does just that. Once you break out into Hyrule Field, you have a lot of freedom, don't get me wrong, but Ocarina of Time is designed a bit like an octopus. There's a main body, that being Hyrule Field, and then there are the various tentacles. Kokiri Forest, Death Mountain, Zora's Domain, Lake Hylia, Gerudo's Desert. All of these areas branch off from the overworld and can be accessed early on, but each one hides so much that you can't access from the get-go. For example, the river leading to Zora's Domain seems alluring, but you can't even see most of it until you acquire bombs. Once you reach the Enclave proper, you can explore for 30 minutes before realizing that it holds an entire dungeon. In the belly of a giant fish, no less. This brings me to Ocarina of Time's dungeons, an essential component of a Zelda game's DNA. Whenever I think about this series, the first mechanical element that pops into my head are the dungeons. These are the moments where your skills are truly tested, both in terms of combat and puzzle solving. That duality is part of what makes Zelda special. Not only does it test your ability to execute your goal, it tests your capacity to figure out what that goal even is. The dungeons on display here manage that balance better than ever. More than ever, these dungeons also feel entirely rooted within the game's world. The first one literally takes place inside a giant tree with a mustache. After that, you're in the depths of a mountainside, and after that, you're maneuvering your way through the insides of King Jabu Jabu. Adding all of this context also makes each dungeon feel so distinct from any other. Thematically, they all look different, but the tangible design also supports the circumstance. The Great Deku Tree, for example, features heavy verticality, given that he's, a tree. Dodongo's cavern centers around a huge cavernous space, while Jabu Jabu's belly is appropriately full of cramped, narrow hallways. Beyond just making sense, these various settings confidently thrust the series into the world of 3D. It may not be readily apparent initially, but if you really think about it, designing a Zelda dungeon with an additional dimension must have been incredibly daunting. You'd think Ocarina of Time might stumble, but it somehow manages to stick the landing completely. Here's a perfect example. As I mentioned, the Great Deku Tree features a vertical design with many floors. About halfway through the dungeon, you reach the top with no clear means of progressing any higher. What's the solution? Jumping down past everything you've done so far through the floor itself. Gravity enables you to pass through this web into the lower half of the dungeon. Spatial puzzles like this can be found all over the place, and they never get old. Of course, what's the point of doing all of this without a little narrative context to guide you? Ocarina of Time provides plenty, and its story is yet another example of how it manages to outdo its older siblings. The premise is fairly straightforward. Link is called upon by Zelda to defeat the evil figure Ganondorf, but how all of this unfolds is what makes it so memorable. This was easily the most cinematic game Nintendo had ever released, chock full of cutscenes and memorable characters. They may look dated by today's standards, but in replaying the game, I found that it doesn't really matter. Link is just as likable, Ganondorf just as imposing, Darunia just as limber. A compelling story remains that way no matter how much it ages. Speaking of which, I'd be remiss not to discuss Ocarina's central theme of time, and yes, I will be delving into some spoilers here. Initially, the game appears to be a fairly straightforward adventure, but about a third of the way in, Link pulls the Master Sword from its resting place and changes everything. That's right, Link's a big boy now. Freeing the Master Sword stores Link away for 7 years, until he's old enough to contend with true evil. Unfortunately, that's also given Ganondorf time to enact his malevolent plans, taking over Hyrule and casting the land into an era of darkness. Now, as an adult, Link must rise to the occasion and find a way to save what's already destroyed. The first time I saw that Link had aged, my mind was blown. My child brain had never even conceived of such a plot twist. Even more shocking, though, was witnessing the horrors that had formed in my absence. The once bustling Hyrule market is now filled with re-deads. The castle has now become a floating bastion of Ganondorf's evil. To see the world that you've grown to know change so drastically is truly unsettling. Again, Ocarina of Time isn't the first game to incorporate time within its story, but I've played few that have explored it this compellingly. Of course, this time jump carries gameplay ramifications as well. Some of the tools that Link has relied upon are no longer usable, like his slingshot or boomerang, forcing you to establish a new lineup of items. Adult Link also begins visiting a string of dungeons that are notably more complex than those that came earlier. The Forest Temple is the first of these and features a greatly increased scope and depth. A first run-through of this one can easily take 2 hours if you're not utilizing any outside assistance. I won't outline them all, but rest assured, the latter stretch of this game will test you in all regards. Perhaps the most compelling time-based mechanic, though, is the ocarina itself. Introduced early on, the ocarina enables Link to play various songs that help solve puzzles, but eventually, the Ocarina of Time enables Link to fast travel back to the Temple of Time, where he can reinsert the Master Sword and travel 7 years back to the past. Certain tasks can only be completed in one of the two eras, meaning that you'll be doing a fair bit of time travel if you want to see everything the game has to offer. Other songs learned on the ocarina enable Link to fast travel to different parts of the world, change the time of day, or even affect the weather. You develop a close bond with the instrument over the course of the game and will likely commit most of the songs to memory as your adventure continues. Speaking of music, how could I discuss Ocarina of Time without paying tribute to its soundtrack? Without question, this is my favorite video game soundtrack of all time. Koji Kondo, per usual, delivers an unbelievable display of earworms that are eternally associated with their respective locales. The rush of sun-drenched adrenaline that is the Hyrule Field theme, the funky, subdued jive of Goron City, or the quiet, haunting melody heard inside the Forest Temple. Every track is a winner, and the OST as a whole runs the entire gamut of emotion. I know that nostalgia can be particularly impactful when it comes to music, but there's just no denying the quality on display here. That word, nostalgia, is important to discuss. Undeniably, nostalgia plays a massive role in the media that we hold most dear. I started Ocarina of Time at the age of 7. At the time though, I was too young to really tackle the game properly, so I only made much in the way of progress when my older cousin came to visit from out of town. With their assistance, I slowly chipped away at the game, and I mean slowly. It must have taken close to 5 years before I finally rolled credits, which seems appropriate. Just as Link needed to mature before he was ready to save the land, I needed to do a little growing up myself before I was ready to help him do it. When I finally brought the journey to an end, the first thing I did was call my cousin to share the exciting news. So yes, I certainly admit that my nostalgia-colored glasses intensify my passion. No game is perfect, especially when considering how quickly video games age compared to other forms of media. So sure, elements of the control scheme are antiquated, some of the puzzles a bit too obtuse, some of the character models a bit… A lot of these quibbles are inevitable with the passage of time that not even an ocarina can reverse. And yet, if we peel them away to view Ocarina of Time's core, the razor-sharp design, the massive scope, the intangible charm, we find a game that's largely immune to time's weathering effects. Here I am, over 20 years older than I was when I first started Ocarina of Time. As I sit here writing about it, I think I can see more clearly than ever how much it defied what I love about video games in general. That opportunity to pick up a sword and jump into a world of unknown. to overcome trials, to fall in love with characters, to be the hero that real life rarely gives us the chance to be. It's magic, and it hasn't aged a day.